construction management. You look at the SACP-CMP. The SACP-CMP is charged, of course, with registering all project managers and construction managers. In essence, what they will ultimately do is that they do want support for youth to be able to be in those programs. But we do see now and then that they have been struggling to make sure that people move from candidacy into professionalism. So those kinds of problems then require sort of curated and very directed sector-wide or sector-supported kinds of programs that I would like to think that ACA is currently working on, whereby if, say, for example, you come into a particular workplace, you know that this company has a structured kind of way where a kind of sort of route for you as a young professional to come in and then work in government. Yes, there are some instances where I do know that there are organizations that do provide that kind of support, but there are also institutions or spheres of government that don't support it. For example, you take a municipality in Matatiele and you compare it with maybe COJ, you would see that maybe probably COJ does provide, or maybe Matatiele does provide, but somehow there's no alignment in terms of how youth development should be done in the construction sector by different parties. And as you might know, the construction sector is highly fragmented. So you have a situation whereby you have different types of organizations from client side, and also you have the supply side, which is your contractors, suppliers, and all the professionals or the guys that provide the professional services for those kinds of things. So you then find yourself in a situation where it's quite difficult for you as a young professional to sort of navigate your way in within. Reason being why I say this, because if you look at other sectors, let's say, for example, chartered accountants, it's very clear as a chartered accountant where when you finish school, what do you need to do in order to get your professional registration, in order to be ultimately registered as a chartered accountant and so forth. And if you look at lawyers as well, for lawyers, it's very straightforward. When you finish from school, if you want to be an attorney, you know that I need to do 2 years of my articles, and therefore from there, I will be then admitted into the High Court of South Africa. You look at other professions, for example, particularly those that are in the finance space, it's very easy to tell how to progress from A to B. But if you look at the construction sector in general, it's not as straightforward. There are ways in which there are things that could be done in order to align the whole sector towards one sort of framework, but at the same time, there are also peculiarities in the different sectors, hence the current blockages in terms of how that is done. So in as far as professionalism and professional development is concerned, colleague, I'm just going to stop there. There are quite a lot of issues that we will discuss. I'm hoping that we'll get to towards the Q&A, because I'll allow for everyone to then engage with us in that Q&A. And then insofar as entrepreneurship is concerned, entrepreneurship is quite unique. It is taken by the brave amongst us, primarily because there is some element of support that is also required when you are going to start a business. There are two types of businesses that would usually be there. You would have innovation-driven kinds of businesses. Those are your digital kinds of types of businesses that are sort of now starting to take a lot of they are trying to, well, they are at least gaining some momentum in some areas. We are seeing some prop tech businesses in South Africa. We are seeing various types of tools that are being developed to service various types of areas within real estate and construction as well in South Africa, which has not been the case before. And the second type of business is then the normal types of business. This is your traditional business model. The business model has been tested. You know how it works. If you start a construction company, you tender for jobs, you execute, you complete, you finish. If you start a rental business, the rules around those businesses, we all know that they are well established, they are well understood. So there are those areas, those broad areas, if I can categorize them, whereby as a young person you can participate. And then another thing is that in terms of that support, there's also very limited type of support in the sector. There are some good initiatives that are happening. If you look at, I'll make an example with GrowthPoint. GrowthPoint does have an enterprise development program called Property Point. It's not necessarily for youth, but they do work with young people that are entrepreneurs trying to establish themselves and so forth. And if you look just outside of that ecosystem, you also have Black Umbrellas. It's done by Cyril, the Cyril Ramaphosa Foundation, in partnership with I think so Trust, if I'm not mistaken. They also provide some element of support for those kinds of people that want to start from zero to know, so how do I start my business? What do I need to do? What do I need to register for? What do I need to read and so forth? So you do have an ecosystem of various types of support mechanisms that are in the sector, but some of them are more impactful than the others. So if you look at Property Point, Property Point is a good sort of enterprise development initiative that you would like to see happening in every single business that is listed on the JSE. So if there was some element of coordination around those areas, of course, it would make our lives a bit easier as young professionals that are trying to navigate themselves. But at the same time, entrepreneurship does also require an element of personal ambition. You can't always be hoping that you must always get support, you must always get this and so forth. There are certain things that you need to take initiative insofar as it is concerned, but in as far as the sector is concerned, which is the focus of today, is youth programs. Those programs is what we are then saying that perhaps maybe they are not enough. We still need to see more types of those kinds of initiatives, even if say, for example, it's not necessarily an enterprise development program in a sense, but some sort of competitions that are in the sector that are able to cultivate interest in various areas, a call for proposals or some sort of a pitch kind of session. Those kinds of initiatives, colleagues, that ideally would be focusing on that should be focusing on the support of youth and also the development of various people that are interested in pursuing the entrepreneurial route within. So you look on the government side, yes, government does make specific determinations through its tendering processes. So you're not completely out. There are specific tenders that say they want youth to be part of, but more often than not, the people that know about them are probably the people that are closest to the process. So if you don't check them, you probably wouldn't know. So in government, there is some scope whereby there is some focus on youth-led enterprises. But in as far as private sector is concerned, that market is a bit murky. It's very difficult to have clear-cut opportunities or clear-cut development programs that do focus on specifically young entrepreneurs within that sector. So there's broad scope, colleagues, insofar as entrepreneurship and the support of entrepreneurship in the sector, and also these sort of kinds of the types of support mechanism that they would be there. So if you think about it, in mentorship, for example, there are some areas. For example, if you look at SIBIB has done quite a lot of work insofar as supporting young entrepreneurs within the space. There are also there's also the Housing Partnership Fund, which is quite specific in terms of also supporting youth. So there are pockets of excellence. There are pockets of where good things are happening, but there is no integrated approach within the sector as a whole that needs to guide these types of programs and how they are made available, and also some sort of scheme that will be able to integrate various different types of efforts from different employers. So at least there is some form of uniformity, not uniformity because it's a requirement to have something that's exactly the same as the other, but it would be a good idea that those kinds of initiatives are put out there, and there is a drive from someone like, for example, I do know the Property Charter Council does do some work around this, but it's very important that these are transparent and they are widely available and everyone is able to access them. So colleagues, without going too further, I will then stop there and introduce my first guest, who is going to share his own experience insofar as the whole entrepreneurship journey is concerned, and also just give us his own perspective of what worked for him and what did not work, or where perhaps are the stumbling blocks and so forth. So colleagues, my first guest for today is Mr. Tumo Sepadile. Tumo Sepadile is a young professional who comes from, or was born from Kuruman in the Northern Cape. He's a graduate of the University of Free State and studied quantity surveying there. He's quite passionate about community upliftment through entrepreneurship, and he founded his own company called Stabilies Brown. And insofar as he's concerned, he stands as a representative of young Black entrepreneurs in mining and the construction sector, and is eager to share with you colleagues today his entrepreneurial journey and just give you some insight in relation to how he got to where he got, and also give us some pointers of what worked for him and perhaps what is not working, and maybe where maybe the sector could do more in terms of trying to structure some youth development programs, particularly focused on construction and real estate, or broadly within the built environment. Mr. Tumo, please, you can then proceed with your inputs, and then once you're done, we'll go to the second speaker. Then we will have our engagement where we will be sharing various types of ideas in relation to this area. So, Mr. Tumo, your inputs. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. I hope I'm audible. You just let me know if anyone can hear me. I'm experiencing a bit of network problems, so please forgive me with that regard. First of all, before I proceed further, I would just like to thank the Academy and all the partners involved, inviting me to this platform to come and share my experience as well. I joined in on yesterday's session. I expect to learn a lot, and I'll also share and hope that all the attendees get to learn something from my experience as well. With your permission, Ronnie, can I share a slide?
Yes, you may proceed.
Thank you so much. Just let me know if you guys can see my screen.
Yes, we can see.
Thank you so much. So just to introduce myself once again, my name is Tumo Sepadile. I am the director of Stabilies Brown. I was born and bred in Kuruman in the Northern Cape. I did my primary and intermediate school there, then finished my high school in Rustenburg, did my quantity surveying degree and honors degree at the University of the Free State. Yes, and after there, I worked for about 3 years. And then after that, I founded Stabilies Brown, which was last year. Just to touch a bit on why I joined the entrepreneurship space and why I decided to found my own company. Working as a quantity surveyor, as I did, I got exposed to a lot of different environments, different types of projects, different types of working with different types of clients. And in my personal and own experience, I realized there's so much of a gap. There's so much, of a gap in terms of opportunities. I realized that a lot of service providers really rush to the same direction. They all want to do the same thing. And from there, I saw an opportunity, and I decided that I would eventually get to a point where I would take advantage of the gap that I see. And that's how I founded Stabilies Brown. And our primary focus is construction. However, we are planning on branching into property as well. We have bought 2 separate pieces of land. Hopefully we'll buy third one this year if things pan out as we wish. Yes, so that's a bit of my introduction. And then to tap into empowering the youth. Our main focus as far as empowering the youth is concerned is first through our employment opportunities. We really do try to make these opportunities in such a way that we can equip our employees as much as possible. So far, we've employed a fixed number of people and we haven't let anyone go at this stage. And we have an in-house set program that allows us to track each individual, what they've learned, what they still need to learn, what they're interested in learning. If the program is beneficial in any sense, The program is also fairly newly implemented, and we're trying as much as we can to also improve it. But the biggest thing that me personally that I've learned through empowering other people is that learning is a journey and mentorship is a relationship. You don't just share or give someone a piece of information and expect them to all of a sudden become entrepreneurship. We believe that the best way to develop the youth is through a program that runs over a long-term period where we have a set amount of goals that we want to reach, where we have a program that makes a list of what we're going to teach, how we're going to teach it, and we do follow-up sessions with each and every individual project that we get. We give different employees a chance to play in different roles, so we can at some point we can really build a well-rounded employee, so that eventually when they do decide to leave Stabilies Brown to get access to greener pastures, we know that anyone who's a product of Stabilies Brown will go there and represent and take on the world. Because I also got to a point where I realized that when you're in a new space, you need a lot of guidance. I'm still at a point where I feel I need a lot of guidance. I have more than one mentor, and I attend every training sessions. I come from the mining environment, so where we come from, there's mines that offer trainings, there's government entities that offer trainings, and ever since I started attending these trainings, I can promise you that I've grown so much and I've learned so much from different speakers, from the host speakers that were there, in terms of how to run business. And one thing that I can make a comment on is that when starting out a business, the ultimate goal is to be profitable. So when you target a specific industry, as I did construction, it's very important to realize what you know from what you don't. And with that said, I knew what I knew and I knew what I didn't know, and I allowed room for not knowing that I don't know certain things. And I learned a lot. One of the attendees on the session is a colleague of mine who really taught me a lot, especially in my early stages of running the business. And I still consider him, he's younger than me, but I still consider him a mentor that I have. He's a civil engineer who assisted me in terms of all the technical aspects of it. So when you run a business, you have to know the background of the product that you sell or the service that you're offering. And it all starts today. Once you know your product, it's easy to market your product once you know what you're dealing with or the service that you're offering. And at any point in time when you don't know, it's always better to ask. If you have a mentor, I always advise people who ask me questions about business, I always advise them to get a mentor, because it's through mentorship where you get to learn how to address different challenges that you face. I've made tough calls in my own personal experience, where some were good and some were really bad, and I've lost a lot of money. The first amount that I lost, I will never forget. I made a decision that cost me 36,000 Rand. And I've lost a couple of thousands after that. And till this point, I will never forget my first loss on that 36,000 Rand. And that only just came from a result of not doing a proper study of my product and how to sell my product and my service in my case. And so I always advise people to always ensure that if every gap is covered, if you don't know something, find someone or get an employee who can cover that space, and ensure that when you present your product or when you offer your services, everything is covered to the T. You make sure that your deliverable is delivered as per the requirements. And Ronnie, you mentioned a bit, you touched a bit on tendering as well. From time to time, I also do sessions where I teach fellow contractors as well on tendering the best to my ability, because that's also where I believe that as contractors, we end up digging a hole for ourselves without realizing. Because when it comes to the technical aspect, joining with the commercial part, the pricing thereof, the breakdown, the rate build up, it's very easy to make a mistake. I've been doing this now for 4 years, where I'm counting now from the time I was an employee, doing the same stuff that I do now, basically to the current date. And I've seen companies become insolvent because of minor mistakes. Companies that have been, I think the biggest company that I've seen come down was a company that started out in 1998, if I remember properly. It's the smallest mistakes that really can get you in a lot of trouble. So my biggest advice is try to take advantage of the programs from mining industries, in my case, coming from a mining environment, from government entities, because through attending those sessions where you also get to network, and networking is very important in the sense that I actually got one of my mentors through attending a training of such, and we had a discussion. I told him about my challenges, and we exchanged contacts, and he's been mentoring me now for close to a year. And each time I have a problem, I always call him, and sometimes I get very paranoid. So I just want to run something through someone else to verify and advise if I'm taking the right route. So that's the background of really how I got to a point where I decided, these are the challenges that I faced. These are the set of challenges that I faced, in my career as an employee, career as an employer. And from that, I decided to structure a way in which to help not just other entrepreneurs, but the employees that I have within my company as well. Because ultimately, that's where, as an individual, as a service provider, to make your mark in the industry and to be set apart, you need to start with the basics. You need to start with the people on the ground who are doing the work for you. You need to make them feel comfortable. You need to make them feel empowered. You need to give them room to be able to give their opinions, make them feel like they're valued. And once you start from that point, people will respect you. You respect them because you respect them back, and then ensure that they carry out their tasks as best as they can. And you work your way up right through until you get to a point where you go from one deliverable to the next. And I do the same for colleagues. I have friends of mine who are also contractors. And they come to me for advice on so many aspects. If I don't know something, I tell them I don't know. I call a mentor of mine, and they give us guidance. But the biggest thing that I would say to all the attendees is there's mining in the mining industry. I know with us there's local newspapers that always publishes training, that publishes opportunities. I think that's my very first point of reference as far as seeking assistance is concerned. And I worked my way from there, and I started taking advantage of these opportunities. Last year when I started Stabilies Brown, I started attending these programs. I started asking questions. I started ensuring that to date, I haven't missed any program or training. And sometimes you go to a training and you are taught what you know, but sometimes you never know when you will learn something that will really turn your life around. In my personal experience, I still have a lot to learn. Every once in a while, I have a session with my mentor, have a discussion about where I am, where I'm going, because that's what mentorship is about. That's the kind of relationship you build where, you come with your problems and, you sit down and you dissect, you explain where I am, where I'm going, and they give recommendations as to, how we can solve it, not to spoon feed, but to help me build the kind of mindset where I learn how to think for myself, how to become a problem solver, how to dissect something in such a way that I can see where the fundamental problem is. Because if you solve the root cause of the problem, you understand the problem in to such an extent that you can keep it from occurring again in the future. And in the event that it does, you know how to deal with it then. So as far as my entrepreneurship experience, my first point of reference is, have a mentor. And over and above that, even when you do have a mentor, there's the public trainings that are there. I would advise all attendees to really consider, making sure that you attend platforms such as this one. Like I said, sometimes you'll attend a session and learn, and basically points being discussed will be points that you already do know. But sometimes you'll attend a session that will change your life. So I noted down a couple of items that I felt were really a challenge to me when I started out. And the first one was a point I actually noted down from a friend of mine who's also a service provider. So the 4 points are lack of education, lack of experience. When you're tapping into a space where there's all these big giants and they have references on their profiles, they've been in the game, they know what to do, it becomes very difficult to compete against them, especially in construction. They know, they have contact with suppliers, they know who to contact when, how. So getting to a point where you have to, work within a certain allowance of being profitable, but actually being competitive can be very much of a challenge. I got assistance here from one of my mentors, also one of the top 3 biggest giants in our space. And through that mentorship, I can now start saying that Stabilies Brown has grown significantly in a period of 6 months. The second point is lack of access to relevant information and resources. Sometimes you're ready, you know what you want to do, you know when you want to do it, you have the capability, but sometimes you just don't have the relevant information, the know-how and the resources to be able to execute things in the way that you expect, to do it in the way that you can do it. My next point is lack of wise counsel. That's not having a mentor. Before I had a mentor, I made a couple of bad choices that I learned from. It's also okay to make mistakes as long as you make sure that you don't do them again. And lastly, I think this is one of the biggest one. Lack of access to funds. There was a period earlier this year, there was a period where Stabilies Brown didn't have not even a single project. Went a couple of months, I think went 2 months without a project at all. And it was at that point where I needed to have a sit down and discuss with my colleagues that, we are constantly spending, printing, submitting tenders. We are constantly going to site briefings. even though you don't pay as many people as you did when you had sites going, but there's still the team that's working with you on a daily basis to pay. You're still incurring expenses. And it's lack of access to funds for this type of stuff, where you get to a point where if you don't change your strategy to close the gap where you don't have a project until such a time where you know that maybe after a lead time of so long, we're expecting a response from a particular client. Between, let's say, for example, 3 months, in that 3 months, you can spend so much that even the profit that you've made now, you are depleting it. And when you eventually get a project, it becomes so much of a challenge to execute because now you don't have funds anymore. And like I said, this is the biggest one where I personally had to realize that, in as much as we're in this for the tendering work, I had to downscale and start looking at maintenance project, looking at smaller projects to execute just to keep the cash flow going. Because at the end of the day, it always goes back to the numbers. And, as far as requesting for funds, and I'm going to try to now, with each challenge that I've mentioned, I'm going to try now to sort of offer a guideline of how to work against the challenge, starting from the bottom now working up. I started Stabilies Brown from a loan from the bank, and the interests were insane, and I didn't realize that until I had to pay back the loan, and realized that I needed to start looking for other forms of sourcing funds. And that's when I started becoming aware of youth funds that were available, zero interest loans, so and so. And with research, you can really find out a lot, especially when you've burnt your fingers a couple of times. It's important to know about these entities. I think one of the general ones is NYDA. I know they also have a criteria that they work with, but it's always important to do your research prior, know what the criteria is, what the requirements are, so that when you eventually get there, you know if you meet the requirements and for which entity you meet the requirements, so that the process becomes smoother. And then as far as mentorship is concerned, like I said, I got one of my mentors literally by attending a program. It was a similar platform as this, but it was an in-person program that was being run. It was a training, and that's where I started, networking, and that's when I got one of my mentors, and he's been guiding me. We've had a relationship now for almost a year. So that's my advice as far as mentorship. I think I stressed that enough in this session. And then lack of relevant information and resources. I was listening to a TEDx talk a couple of days ago, and one of the speakers mentioned about how the youth of today, we're in such a good space that we have technology at our fingertips, literally to research anything that we really want to learn about. And I do a lot of listening to TEDx talks. I listen to Vusi Tembekwayo. I listen to and also read Robert Kiyosaki's videos on YouTube. And so the information is there. It's just a matter of really just going out. And I just mentioned public platforms now, not even platforms that are specific to my area alone. Public platforms where I also go for guidance, also go for assistance as far as how I should work my finances, how I should make sure that there's always cash flow coming into the business from month to month, to avoid having a gap of 2 months like I had previously, where there's no income and yet I still have expenses. And also one thing that I appreciate about yesterday's session, I saw one of the speakers yesterday at the end of their presentation also put up their contact details. And with that, you take the person's contact details, you engage with the individual and ask for as much information as you can. And then my last point, lack of education and experience. I got most of my education from varsity, but I'm also aware that there's online trainings, and I think Corobrik also once had a tender training, for contractors, to upskill their employees, included tendering as well. So there's trainings that are being advertised. I think now this is the second year running where I see the government always structures programs and trainings, so many in a fixed time in the year. And I think for those that do not have tertiary qualifications like I do, that I do advise a lot as well. As far as experience is concerned, I got a bit of experience from one of my former employees. I consider him a mentor as well. He really got to a point where he exposed me more to just being an employee, but also on the daily runnings of the business, the long-term goals, short-term goals, mid-term goals. And that's where I got a bit of experience before I started my own business. And, coupled with that, from the technical side, I also got my experience from working as an employee. So I hope that, having mentioned these challenges and possible ways to try to work around them, I hope that I was helpful. And this is the two. Yes, sorry, I forgot to mention SEDA as well. I'm currently in communication with SEDA, and they're also assisting me with the resources for my business, to also try to empower me. So being on this platform, sharing my experience, I'm also very much aware that even me as a youth, on this platform, sharing my experience, I'm also at a point where I need a lot of empowering. And I'm just sharing, my journey up to so far, what I've encountered, where the steps that I still need to take, and that I'm aware that I need to take them. And I think I didn't, if I would have liked to, do a presentation where I did a bit of research under these, indicating the criteria and so on, but I figured this would take so long. It would be a very long presentation. So I just decided, keep the names and list them into, and and mention a word or two in the presentation so that people know, where I also go for assistance. And that would be the end of my presentations.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much
for your presentation in this regard. It was well received. What I think we'll do is that we'll then allow first our speaker, and then we go to the question session where we'll then engage on the various areas that you had engaged. So thank you very much for that. Colleagues, now I will then call in my next speaker. My next speaker is also an entrepreneur. His name is Prince Nqwadeyi. Sorry about that. Prince co-founded iSpani, a data insights company that has enabled thousands of youth to become micro data entrepreneurs. And Prince has established himself as well as a trusted advisor and innovator through the work he has done, that he has guided national government agencies, local government, C-suite executives across consumer insights, innovation strategy for organizations like Unilever, APN, Liberty, Duracell, Nespas, Yoko, UNDP, UNICEF, and also Swiss Reinsurance, and many others across various industry verticals. iSpani, the data insights company, has played a role in influencing access to improved life insurance payments infrastructure, aid support, energy, municipal service delivery, and also infrastructure development, thereby, of course, impacting various people in different spheres of life. His experience ranges across markets like South Africa, Nigeria, Kenya, and the Nordics. Prince holds a BCom in Management Studies with a focus on economics and marketing from UCT. He also holds a Master of Philosophy in Inclusive Innovation from UCT, the Credit School of Business. Prince also co-founded Setana Capital, a working capital finance fund backed by the empowerment arm of Ellen Gray to deliver embedded finance solutions that solve the working capital issue for informal traders. The fund currently delivers a 98.9% repayment rate and 60% refinancing rate, enabling businesses to grow and access much needed trade finance that would ordinarily not be delivered by traditional financial institutions. He's equally involved as an emerging markets advisor at BitProp, a business driving affordable backroom rentals in township and peri-urban communities with a portfolio of over 200 units across Cape Ventures portfolio for Better Fellows, a community of social innovators passionate about socio-economic change and transformation. Prince, are you in the call already?
Yeah, bo.
Yes, Prince. Prince, you can then proceed with your inputs, and then thereafter we will go to the Q&A session.
Cool. Thank you so much for the opportunity, Ronnie. And once again, good evening, colleagues. And thank you so much for taking the time to jump onto the call. Also want to take the opportunity to thank the Academy of Construction and Real Estate for the opportunity just to share my entrepreneurial journey. But I think most importantly as well, to hopefully inspire and create an alternative view on how I think we can add value within society, specifically given the environments and communities in which we come from. So as I said, my name is Prince Nqwadeyi. I run a business called iSpani and Setana Capital, both of which are businesses that specifically play a role within the informal sector. I think I can probably start off by sharing a bit about my journey. I don't really have slides, so I think I'll take the opportunity to engage you directly. So where did iSpani start? iSpani actually started when I was sitting in a marketing lecture in university that was being given by Professor Simpson at the time. And he spoke about the informal sector in South Africa, what we know as IGAS. And Prof. Simpson said in the lecture that the informal sector in South Africa was valued at about 600 billion rand. And Bendlele, I won't lie, I was literally falling asleep in that lecture and I literally sat up straight. And what specifically caught my attention, obviously, was the number that he mentioned. But the interesting thing that followed on from that statement was that the informal sector accounts for, it's twice the size of agriculture's contribution to GDP. So when we look at our townships or the environments where the vast majority of Black people come from in this country, we ordinarily would look at it as environments that are not necessarily inspiring of much confidence or anything to be excited about. Whereas the vast majority of economic activity, specifically as it relates to purchasing power, sits within that specific environment, whether we're looking at it from the perspective of fast-moving consumer goods, or we're looking at it at any sort of value creation as relates to consumption. If you're not engaging the mass market or you're not engaging individuals within the informal sector, your business isn't really going to grow. And for the most part, what that did, it began to shift the lens upon which how I began to think of the ways in which we could create value in that space. So what happened was that he mentioned all of this to us in the lecture, but the thing that he equally mentioned was the fact that brands and businesses were struggling to gain insight on that particular market. So what we decided to do was myself and my co-founders began to think about, okay, on the one side, you've got brands and businesses that are trying to understand why people within the township buy particular products. Why does Umam Dlamini buy oats as opposed to Kellogg's cornflakes? Why does she go for particular clothing items on Shein versus, for example, like buy it at Foschini? These are the sorts of issues that brand managers and companies were struggling with, because if they're able to understand the underlying consumer behavior that informs the decisions that Abantu Bethu use to make their purchasing decisions, they're then able to figure out how to make sure that they get their share of wallet or expenditure. So on the one side, there was a need to solve access to data. insight for brands and businesses. On the second side of it, the other challenge that existed was the fact that obviously in South Africa, and it's no secret that we know we've got a huge issue around youth unemployment in our country. And the big question for us was, how do we play a role in enabling young people to equally play a role in this? So the true story behind how we came up with the idea was that myself and my business partner at the time, Ndando, we lived together in Cape Town. And I'm Christian, so we were praying, and we both had, funny enough, we're praying about this issue in our country, specifically as relates to unemployment. And when we were praying about this matter, we both had the same idea at the same time, like after prayer, of a young person carrying a mobile phone who could actually become an agent to collect data on behalf of brands and businesses. But then comes the issue of, okay, Setana Capital to actually build this technology platform to enable a young person to collect data in real time on behalf of brands and businesses. So what we initially were doing was that we approached the University of Cape Town at the time, and we asked them, hey guys, listen, we know you guys are struggling to collect data within townships. How about we help you guys do that? So we started out doing data collection work for our professors. And they were not paying us a lot of money for this work, to be quite honest. So, I mean, we would do, we would survey 250 households and would be paid like 5,000 Rand to do that. But for us, the whole idea was that we were beginning to understand what was important for brands and businesses to, or what was important on one side from a data collection perspective. That was the starting point. And then the second point was, what are the actual pain points of someone who would actually engage within this sort of work? And we did a number of studies from how TV shows influence criminal behavior within the informal sector, brand switching behavior. Then in that instance, the normal good was, I think, soap. The luxury item was tea. We looked at studies on how young African millennials engage African Ankara fashion. So that's African print material. And then what happened is that we got our big break. And our big break really was, we were in Cape Town at the time. I'm now based in Joburg. So when we're in Cape Town, we got invited to this event via UCT. We don't know why we were invited into this event. We literally felt like it was a matter of like divine intervention and divine providence. And the reality was that we got invited to the British ambassador's house for some random event which spoke to the opening of Parliament. So now to get we arrived there as UCT students, part of the whole event. And what ended up happening was that we never knew that we were being introduced as people who understand the township and understand market research within the space. And it just so happened that Duracell Global at the time was there, and they were investing quite a lot of money in a particular technology business that was looking to develop low-cost solar battery-powered appliances. And they needed a business that was actually going to do the underlying market research work to inform whether or not they should deploy the capital within that business and what the model for scale would look like. And we became the business that they ended up utilizing for that market research project, which subsequently provided us with enough liquidity to be able to build out the technology and to scale and to do things we ordinarily wouldn't be able to do for all intents and purposes. Long story short, I'm going to fast forward because I recognize I don't have a lot of time, is that we built the technology platform and we subsequently scaled it out. We built out an agent network of about 5,000 agents across the country who effectively played the role of collecting data on our mobile platform on behalf of brands and businesses. So they would effectively, we would deploy a survey or a campaign from our dashboard, and it would hit their mobile phones with a notification. They would go out into their communities, would be able to geolocate and track the responses that come in. And every single time they submitted a response, they would earn an income, and they would earn anywhere between like 20 to 50 bucks per response in that specific instance. And that played a critical role in enabling us to do a number of projects for brands within financial services, with like such as Liberty, by way of example. We did a lot of work for them within their the Emerging Consumer Markets Division. We did work for NASPERS, we did work for UNDP, we did a massive study for them around the just energy transition as it relates to moving away from traditional coal-fired power stations and looking at what does that look like in terms of the economic implication for individuals within rural and township communities, and a bunch of other studies for a ton of other brands. And we were blessed that on our journey, we were really, and I think to Dumi's point, the importance of mentors played a critical role in helping not just to open doors for us, but also to let us think through the parts of our business that we needed to verify for viability. And I think one of the most important things that we have to acknowledge is that entrepreneurship is not easy. It is a difficult journey, but it does require you to have people that can play a role in enabling you to sense check the ideas. And one of the critical things that emerged for us, and we began to realize within the context of our own entrepreneurial journey, was that with any business, and James Clear speaks about this in his book, I think it's Atomic Habits, and he talks about how you don't rise to the level of your goals, you fall to the level of your systems. And very quickly, we realized the importance of having to build the right sort of systems within our organization, our business, to enable us to maintain the scale, because you grew from a business that didn't have agents and you grew to 5,000 agents, and you need to be able to manage that. And we began to experience certain pain points as it relates to what does it look like to keep the channel alive? What does it look like to ensure that everyone within the broader context of the agent network is consistently finding value within our platform? So these were some of the issues that we had to navigate through, and part of the importance of having a solid ecosystem of mentors and advisors played a critical role in enabling us to navigate this. Our journey was not without mistakes, but even in that, I think we were able to deliver on some really, really exciting projects and play a critical advisory role in helping, specifically in times when NGOs like and global development organizations like UNDP or UNICEF wanted to deliver grants into township communities, and to verify that those grants were actually being delivered to actual individuals and not to ghost people. Our technology was critical and front and center in enabling that sort of verification to happen. And I think during that time, we enabled delivery to over like 13,500 households, or 11,500 households, sorry, which was super impactful to see the role that just an idea can have in ending up playing a critical role in ensuring that 11,500 households end up being able to receive grants in a manner that's legitimate, and the global funders who are funding that process can also go back and say that the funds are deployed appropriately. And these are just some of the examples of the work that we did there. And what happened was, in the context of building iSpani, at a certain point in time, we got an opportunity to do client work in Nairobi in Kenya. And this is how I segue into the story around Setana Capital and how that started. And when we went to Kenya, we ran into a company called 4G Capital, and they were focused on providing spaza stores, in effect, with working capital finance to grow their businesses. We found that to be very interesting, and then when we totally forgot about it when we came back from our client assignment down in Kenya. But Ntando walked into a spaza store in Philippi Village in Cape Town. And when he walked into that store, he met a trader, and the trader was crying. And Ntando asked him, "Ukalelan?" And Uputi said, "Listen, all I ever want to do is to feed myself, feed my family, and feed my business." And he asked him, "Okay, how much money do you need?" And he was like, "I need 10,000 Rand. And we're like, "Okay, cool. That's not a lot of money. What's the real issue?" And as Ntando began to ask him a couple of questions, he quickly realized that the gentleman had what we call a working capital finance problem, which is a situation whereby it's not that your business doesn't actually make sense. It's just the fact that you don't have enough cash flow to meet your needs within that particular month. And if you can get some sort of bridging finance to carry you over for an extra 30 days or 14 days, you'd be able to meet your obligations. And that moment, and when we talk about the power of a moment, that moment became absolutely transformational within the context of our entrepreneurial journey, because it made us ask a question. How many more people are like this in South Africa who are traders, whether South African or foreign national, who have viable businesses but are unable to access the funding that's required to enable them scale and grow, or to meet their immediate needs without having to go to a loan shark or, some sort of illegal institution or individual that would charge them ridiculous interest rates like 50% a week. So we began, when Ntando came back to the office, told us about this, we began to think about, okay, how do we build a business or business model that could actually service this individual, but far more importantly, think about servicing many more individuals within this space. And we came up with this idea of trying to test our concept. Now, one of the big things in entrepreneurship is more often than not, people will tell you, no, just start. And I would say, no, don't just start. Start off by testing your assumptions. And what's the importance about testing your assumptions? Testing your assumptions means prove out the things you think to be true by actually creating an environment that enables you to do that within the market. And I'll give you an example of what testing your assumptions look like as I explain our story. So our assumption was the fact that if you provide working capital finance or trade finance or unikeza ispaza store imali in an instance whereby they lack cash, you would have helped that person and that person would be able to repay you your money. And the key assumption was that if you give someone cash and they indicate that they have a cash flow issue and you're able to track their payments, you'll be able to get imali yako back. So we had to find an environment in which we could do this. And we did this in Randburg Square. And the first test we did was that we had 65,000 Rand and we're like, we're going to give roughly 13 traders 5,000 Rand each for argument's sake. And we were targeting Omamzo who were hawkers and traders. And we went up to them, we spoke to them about what we're trying to do. We wanted to find out, did they have needs? And as you know, everyone said, yes, ding malim danam. And we gave Abantu Imali guys. And in the process of doing that, because what ended up happening was that we lost almost all of the money. We only recovered 15,000 Rand of it. And we're like, yo, how did we lose all of our money? And what we realized was that we went in there without actually going through the right sort of processes. And very quickly, we realized Uguti, a lot of them were already in debt, number one, to an illegal syndicate that had put them in a debt cycle that was charging them 50% a week. So the money that they took from us, they were actually utilizing to repay those individuals those loan sharks or mashonisas in that instance. And now we've lost Mali too. And obviously we're not going to go after Umamzo, who is selling food on the side of the road or veggies. So we had to be like, okay, guys, let's re-strategize. And very quickly we realized, no, man, instead of giving people money, how about we focus on giving individuals stock? And imagine if we partner with wholesalers to actually plug into their systems and get the transactional data of those particular traders. And off the back of that, deposit money with the wholesaler to then enable them to grow. So we went along that particular process and it finally started working. And we managed to get Alan Gray's empowerment arm to fund the business. And we've since been able to grow it out quite aggressively. So we're funding through a number of wholesalers. Some of them you may or may not know, like Devlin Cash and Carry and Big Sev and Pretoria, Palm Tree. And we're growing out quite aggressively. And the beautiful thing that we've been able to see, so our ticket sizes, we give out anywhere between 10 to 200,000 Rand as a maximum ticket size. They pay that back over a 14 to 30-day period. And we don't charge interest that's larger than 6%. So, and that means that, and the interest is non-compounding. So just to give you a sense of it is that if someone borrows 10,000 Rand, the maximum they'll ever pay back is 10,600 Rand within a 30-day period. And if they default, we won't compound their interest. So, and in that process, we've been able to prove out to traditional capital providers and asset managers and other pension funds and that, listen, funding businesses within the township and within the informal sector actually can work, but you've got to fund them in a very different and unique way. And we also don't look at the traditional, what you call it, financing criteria that they would require, whether sometimes we look at bank statements, but we don't go and ask you to give me an income statement or a balance sheet because we don't necessarily need that insight to make a decision on whether or not you require credit. So that business is really doing well. And we're so happy to see the impact that we're making in the lives of people to help them put food on the table, but far more importantly, to see businesses grow. There are people who have opened 2 or 3 spaza stores as a consequence, Black South Africans, of the funding that we've opened. One of the most interesting stories was the story that the team told me of Ubaba, who mentioned that because of obviously the influx of foreign nationals within the spaza store space, unfortunately, what happened, he had to lose his business and his kids were going to decent schools and his wife divorced him because he was no longer able to provide. But since our funding came on board, Ute, in his words, siyakwazi uzimela njengendoda. And the beautiful thing about that is just to be able to see the power of how, when you decide to act on your ideas and really be a good steward about it, the network effect it has on the lives of people. And now he's able to provide for his family, he's able to send his kids to school because of the line of credit that he's able to receive from our business. And he's opened, I think, 2 more stores as a consequence of that. So this is part of the heart behind impact. And then I think the last story I'll share with you is the story of BitProp. And as you guys know, Ekasi, one of the big things that exists there is this whole notion of backroom rentals. And once again, it's the fact that these are things and opportunities that exist within our environment, but more often than not, we tend to overlook them at times. So what happened was that backroom rentals, obviously, as we know, is a space that's specifically growing within the context of the township. And the big thing that we saw as BitProp within that particular space was the fact that, one, it wasn't formalized, and two, there was a need to look at how we could provide funding to existing homeowners who want to actually grow their businesses. So what happened was the business was actually founded, interestingly enough, by one of my mentors, a gentleman by the name of Carl Sameli, who's a Swedish national. And he moved over to South Africa and he wanted to create a business that provides a long-term pension rental, pension income for people within the township, but to do so in a way in which that it's sustainable and creates business for itself or ongoing revenue for itself. So what he did was that he would invest 1.2 million rand through the BitProp in a particular property and build 6 to 8 units. That rent that's generated from the 6 to 8 units would then be split between BitProp, the business, and the homeowner. And after 10 years, the property would belong to the homeowner. And the second model that we have is we also try to get, after we've proved out rental over like a 6-month period, we try to get the banks to kind of buy us out and convert our initial investment within those properties into a home loan in effect. That then gets carried on by the homeowner. So there, BitProp's been able to make a massive impact in the lives of people, specifically within the Western Cape. We've got about 200 units now, building currently 100, and by the end of the year, we should be targeting to have about 500 units. And this came out of the idea of looking to create long-term income for people within the informal sector in South Africa, utilizing property as a vehicle for that. But secondly, I think also with a heart to make an impact. One of the key things that you'll hear as a general thread through everything that I'm talking about is that for us, it's less about focusing on pursuing money and really focusing on trying to make an impact. And I think it's important that as entrepreneurs, while it's important to pursue a profit, it's also important to make sure your heart is in the right place, because we're in an environment whereby it's easy to get a tender, and then upope. But what you end up doing with that process is that you affect your value system and you end up not being an ethical entrepreneur. And I think it's very important, specifically in environments like built and construction, that are tender heavy, that force you specifically as a Black entrepreneur to interact with government more often than not, that you've got to make sure that you keep your value system in the right place and say no to corruption. But far more importantly, to make sure that when you're doing your business, you do it in a way that your headspace is impact first. And more often than not, we have this view that if I focus on trying to make an impact, I don't necessarily make money, and that's not true. It's possible to be a capitalist with a conscience. It's possible to be entrepreneurial and yet profitable. But I think the appeal that I'm making today is to say, let's be business people who build businesses with the right sort of value system. And far more importantly, because we're trying to build our country. I think South Africa as a country has amazing potential. We've got amazing young people. Sisonke Apa in this room, we're smart, we're intelligent. But if we buy into corruption and we buy into paying the police officer the cool drink as opposed to taking the fine because we were speeding, or if we always look for the easy way out, the country is not going to be able to develop. And part of the reason why I talk about ethics is because for me, it's critical that we are ethical entrepreneurs. It's the only way ukuthi sizawusakha isizwe in the right way. So I think at the core of it, if you leave this conversation with anything, the biggest thing for me is I want to encourage each and every single one of us not to be afraid to start. To Tomi's point, take as many of the opportunities that come your way to learn. And I'll leave you with the question that was asked to me when I initially had started my master's program. And the question that our professor asked us was, who would you be and what would you have achieved if you were just 1,000 times more bolder than you are right now? I'm going to ask the question again. So the question is, who would you be and what would you have achieved if you were just 1,000 times more bolder? And the question has less to do with what you do and don't do, and more to do with your ability to give yourself permission to do the things that you think you can't. So my encouragement to each and every single one of us is to don't just dare yourself enough to dream, dare yourself enough to take up the opportunities that you consistently disqualify yourself with, disqualify yourself to taking by talking yourself out of those opportunities, because you don't know what's on the other side of a conversation. Thank you. Yeah, I think I'm done. And thank you once again for the opportunity to share my journey, and hopefully this story was able to add value to you tonight.
Thank you very much, Prince, for that insightful engagement. It was well received. Quite a lot of points raised, and there, I'm sure colleagues here probably do have some questions, and also probably want to add to perhaps some of the things that you guys were raising. So quite crucial points. Some very insightful as well. Colleagues, I will not waste any further time. I will just find out who might have questions for our guests. Then we take those questions and engage. It does not necessarily have to be a question, colleagues. It can also be just something that you wish to add, or something that you that perhaps you think is important, that also needs some focus, or even an open-ended question that doesn't necessarily have to have an answer at this point, but quite crucial for the purpose of engagement. Colleagues, is there anyone who has a question? I'm gonna just take hands. Of just raise your hand, and I'll note you. Then from there, we'll take the first 2 or 3 people, and then we take those and go to the next again. Are there any questions? Okay, I can see there is Kifenze Lipoko. Anyone else? Okay, maybe Kifenze, you can proceed, and then from there we'll then pick someone. We'll then get someone. You can proceed with the question first.
How's it going? How's the chair? How's it, colleagues? Thank you for this opportunity. I took note of what the first speaker said with regards to funding. I think capital is a huge issue in this country. If you are an entrepreneur, Black entrepreneur, you know, the banks have a lot of systems, a lot of walls they put in place to make sure that you're not financed for your project or anything you want to invest in. So last year I was able to reach out to Nqwadeyi, and we did the whole course around July, and you know, there was a lot of admin in between, but we did successfully get funding towards the end of the year. And you know, I've noticed that I applied for a certain threshold as an amount that requires tax clearance and management accounts. You know, on that threshold, I was compliant for everything. I had the relevant documents, but I didn't know about you know, policies they have around, you know, construction and built environment. So, you know, stock including like, not being able to buy paint and bricks and cement, as a result of that, my threshold went, way low, without being able to appeal, to say that, listen, I'll put other stock in that place. So in as much as it's empowering, I think, I wanted to reach out to find out if there are other funding agencies that can give you like a capped amount, as opposed to you just giving quotations for stock. Is there a platform that can sort of give you an amount, and then you back it up with your previous records, your financial records, just to show that you are responsible with money. You'll show your tax history and all that, and general compliance.
Anyone wants to take that, Tumo? Okay, I'll then take the next one, Desti from the Merv. And we also have, yeah, Desti, you can go ahead with your input / question. Desti, do you still have a question? Not sure if your mic is off, but okay, I see you moved your hand again. Colleagues, anyone else with a question for this round, and then we can then check again if there are further questions. Okay, on your side, Prince, any inputs on that? Also, also any inputs on that regarding what Kifan just said?
I think maybe I can just jump in there. So maybe just to get clarity on the question, is he saying he's looking for a platform? Because I think maybe it's a point of clarity from my side. Is he asking, is there a platform where you can load up your documents on a consistent basis? And as you're doing that, that platform is utilizing that as a basis to determine how much funding they give you? Is that the question?
If it's just clarifying.
Okay, so you have your government scheme, which is Nqwadeyi, right?
Mm-hmm.
So their criteria or how they sort of give you funding is it's stock, it's equipment.
Mm-hmm.
So I was asking if there's like an alternative platform that can give you, funding, that can give you, funding in actual cash that you can utilize for your business. I know there's CEDA. There's quite a few. A lot of them have like that. They have portals, websites that haven't been developed to a point where you can reach the end. You kind of get stuck halfway, and it's a bit tedious to actually go to the head office. Yeah, I'm just kind of looking for alternatives right now.
So I mean, like from my side, I can tell you that within I like most of the capital I have comes from private sector. I'll just be upfront about that. So I think within the government space, you obviously have a lot of these different government agencies, and they have their own processes and mandates as defined by whether that's PFMA and internal government processes to be able to unlock the capital. And I don't think those mandates will particularly change, at least from a policy perspective. But I think in the space where you're looking for cash, there's typically funding that's out there. The big question is, if uzawufuna imali, the question they'll ask you is, do you have a project for which this money is going to? So very few people are in the space of providing initial startup funding, but where there is a project to fund, then there are always ways to unlock capital to fund those particular projects. So for example, you've got guys who have purchase order financing, where they have an existing project, and they can go to whether it's companies like Custom Capital Finance, whether it's companies like there's the People's Fund does invoice financing as well. It's another great Black-owned financing house that does interest, and they do a lot of work for people specifically who win government contracts, and because they're plugged into Hulumende quite well. So I think it all depends on, are you looking for initial startup funding to start? Typically, most financiers would want to limit their risk and focus on either funding your stock directly or funding assets. Another one that does assets is a company called Mutualism, but I don't know if they're fully deployed right now, but they also look at early stage startup businesses. But you must be deploying that capital towards an asset or productive asset. Then they can look at that. They would take a risk view on you. So those are the organizations I could potentially suggest at this point.
Okay, I think that answers my question. That we're pretty much in growth phase. I mean, as much as they did have a lot of requirements and regulations, they did offer some funding, and I think it got us to a certain point. So as a business now, we are in growth phase. We want to start scaling. So I'll look into some of those names. I did jot them down. And I'll let them know, sort of what I want to do moving forward, and then, based on their criteria, they'll advise moving forward.
Okay. All right. Thank you very much for the colleagues. Are there any further questions in this regard? Can you just ask maybe just two that I noted on my side? Maybe the question is, it's both directed to our speakers. Colleagues, you both mentioned that there's a lot of training and learning that somewhere, somehow, you guys also do. Are there any maybe pointers that you guys can direct our audience with regards to maybe the areas or the sources of knowledge, or the sort of the ecosystem that they need to plug themselves in, so at the very least they sort of access some of the opportunities that you guys have had before, or maybe some advice, perhaps also in closing, some advice in general with regards to how practically some of the actions that you guys would recommend insofar as our audience is concerned. I'll start with you, Tumo. Is Tumo still in the call? Okay, maybe Prince, you can just shoot through while I check on Tumo.
Cool, awesome, no worries. I think from my side, one of the practical things I could say as a starting point is be very clear on what it is that you don't know. Sometimes you know what you know, and sometimes you don't know what you don't know. And I think specifically in the early stages, every single industry needs to be learned and understood. And it's important for you to be clear about what it is you don't know, whether it's, I don't know how to go about applying for this tender, or I don't know about where to source this material, or be clear on what that looks like for you. What is it that you don't know? And then secondly, be clear about what does it look like for you to find the necessary information. And the beautiful thing about life, specifically if you're taking the entrepreneurial route, is that it forces you to put yourself out there. And I remember, as awkward and as weird as this sounds, the first time I had to put myself out there was when it was probably the most embarrassing thing, but it worked. I reached out to someone on Facebook who used to be like some exec. He ran a company called Bell Equipment, and used to be on the audit committee of the city of Cape Town at the time. He was retired, and I reached out to him and I needed advice. And literally in 24 hours, the guy came to where I was staying and was like, okay, Prince, who are you? What do you want? How can I help you? And the reality of the matter is sometimes putting your hand up and asking for help is important, but people can only help when you are clear on what it is that you need and what it is that you don't know. I think the second practical thing I would encourage you to do is to consistently invest in your... Hello? I think you guys can still hear me. The second thing I just consistently encourage is continue to invest in your mental development. So not necessarily going to school, but reading books, books specifically around business, around what it looks like to scale, what it looks like to start. Obviously, some books will not be contextual to South Africa in terms of where you can find money to start. But I find that it's always not value adding when you are knowledgeable about or aware of some of the pitfalls and challenges that exist within that particular space. And thirdly, the practical thing I would encourage is don't be afraid to go around talking about what it is that you want to do, sharing your dreams, and sharing where you want to start, because the more you get out there and you communicate what it is that you do or you're looking to do, you find yourself in a space where you attract the right sort of help. So I think make sure that you consistently are networking and playing a critical role in getting yourself out there to be able to find the right opportunities and people. But fourthly, be genuine, be authentic, and most importantly, don't be transactional in the approach that you take to building relationships. Remember, relationships are the most important thing, more important than money. So be deliberate about building value-adding relationships and creating value within your relationships.
Thank you very much for that, Prince. Much appreciated. Colleagues, this is now the end of our engagement. I will just check if there is a last question, the last question open there. Maybe just quickly, which criteria do you use to select houses where you build back rooms? Are you involved in sourcing of tenants and day-to-day running of the back rooms? I think that's directed to you. Maybe quickly close that out, please, for us.
Cool. So specifically on the backroom rental business, we're currently in the Western Cape for now. Primary focus that we look at is we have an outbound team that actually does a lot of that for us. Initially, we use social media, funny enough, and we have an on-the-ground team that also goes out. And then obviously we run people's credit information through the bureaus to get a sense of, is the person employed, unemployed, what is their credit history, and all of that sort of stuff, because we want to make sure we're taking the right bet on the right sort of person. Is the person employed? If the person is not employed, it doesn't mean that we can't invest on their property. And then we also have a team that runs tenant sourcing for us internally at BitProp. So yeah, that hopefully provides context. I've played, my role is largely on the advisory side to the management team and also assisting on the capital raising side.
Okay, no, thank you very much for that. Bonga, your question before we close?
Yeah, thanks for a great webinar. Really appreciated. So my question is to Prince. Yeah, my name is Bonga Masoka. I am the founding director at Splash Coatings Africa. So we are 100% youth and Black owned, affordable premium paint manufacturing and retail company. So we manufacture our own paint and we retail it through our own stores. We currently have 3 stores in Soweto, Soshanguve, and Midrand. And we are in the process of scaling the business. And I think Ronnie was talking about Property Point. We are part of the Property Point Enterprise Development Program through Investec Property Development. And I would encourage everyone who's listening to this to look into it. But nevertheless, to Prince, I'd like to connect with you offline for a chat, especially on your Setana Capital, on how we could look into probably collaborating or working together on scaling the business model that we're trying to build. Yeah.
Okay, I'm quite sure that that could be organized. Just try maybe I think the ACA admin team is here. Drop them an email, then probably will respond with the contact details of Mr. Prince. Would that be fine, Prince?
Yeah, yeah, please feel free to share my email details and with him. Keen to connect, Bonga. Thanks for reaching out.
Okay, I'll just drop an email here, Bongane, just so that you just send there, then I'll coordinate from there. Yeah, I just sent that email there. Just say it's at info@oneacre.co.za. Just drop it off, and then the coordinator from ACA will be able to then deal with that.
Okay.
Okay. All right. Colleagues, thank you very much for joining us for today's session. Prince, thank you very much for also taking the questions. We are going to have another session, a webinar tomorrow as well, but that's more focused on different career paths, and it's more targeted towards university and young professionals. It's not so much entrepreneurship. But do join us for that, colleagues. Once again, thank you on behalf of the Academy and also our partners, Cyber Young Professionals, and also Youth in Property Association for joining us with this. And we will then meet again tomorrow for those who still wish to join us. It might be a great idea, even if you are a bit more senior, to try and join, because the target is mainly students. So the questions and the Q&A might be very important or eye-opening for them, because it deals with different types of career paths. Thanks, colleagues. I will then close from